And we're going to be talking today about Concealment Uncovered. And just as a sort of a housekeeping effort, I would like to ask everyone, if possible, if you could please mute your speakers so that it doesn't interfere with the webinar until we get to the Q&A session at the end. So with that, let's get started. Cellular concealment is really, it's a very, very interesting topic these days. Cell tower concealment has really become a hot topic over the past several years for a couple of real key reasons. One, it's really kind of hard to imagine what it would be like to go through a day without being able to stay in touch with family and friends, to be able to get access to the latest news and information that's out there by way of your mobile device, to be able to text, and in essence just even really staying in touch with customers and business associates. It's really kind of become an ingrained part of our lives. But this has really led to, especially over the past several years with the introduction of the smartphone, a huge spike in the amount of traffic that's being carried over the cellular network. In the past, it was just primarily voice. Now we're looking at voice and data, and just continues to keep growing at a spiraling rate. And it's pretty obvious what the typical mobile users are looking for today. They're really looking for ubiquitous coverage and always available capacity, period. So this increase has really driven an increase in demand for more cell towers, bigger networks, better coverage. But there's a huge issue, obviously, and the real question is that how do you integrate this need for bigger and better cellular networks and cell towers, and at the same time, too, be able to take into consideration the needs of property owners? It's clear that in many instances that property values are negatively affected by cell towers because of the fact that they are a bit unsightly in the network or in the landscape, and it's important to be able to try to figure out ways in order to be able to kind of balance the need for ubiquitous coverage, but at the same time too being able to take into consideration the quality of life that goes along with living in the communities that you're in. So today we're going to talk about cellular concealment, or really ways to help your community to live in harmony with cellular growth while maintaining the quality of life that's so important to communities these days. And cellular concealment as an industry has been around for 20 years, and it started from very, very humble beginnings. In the beginning, really, the standard operating procedure was using plywood as the material of choice and using spray paint as the means to be able to blend in concealment applications into the background. But today the industry really has evolved considerably, where now we're looking at very sophisticated new technologies and new materials that are available for cellular concealment applications. And at the same time too, we're creating a wide range of options to be able to choose from, so that you now have a whole lot of different ways of being able to look at concealing cell towers. And so let's see here. Moving on to our agenda, this is what we're really going to be talking about today: the theory of concealment, what it is and how it works. And we're going to talk about best practices, where you can really see how communities have taken ownership of what's available in the concealment arena and used it to its best advantage. We're also going to be talking about successful applications, the anatomy of the successful application, and meaning what really needs to take place behind the scenes in order for everything to come together. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on Q&A, and then we'll talk about next steps. So first of all, let's talk about the building blocks of wireless concealment theory. And concealment theory has been around a long time, and it certainly hasn't started with the wireless industry. I mean, in fact, really, concealment has been around since the beginning of time, when man and nature has been using and evolving concealment techniques as a way to be able to protect themselves or to create an advantage for them being effective hunters. And so concealment really kind of breaks down into three key building blocks: hiding, blending, and disguising. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of those. So first of all, hiding, that's pretty straightforward. It's masking, as an example, an antenna equipment from view. So the idea is that you want to be using materials that are relatively transparent so that the cell equipment can still operate effectively. But some of the things that are really important to take into consideration is that you're looking at the initial architectural design, the lines and the contours, and that you're building something that basically blends in, if you will, or kind of it becomes part of the structure as opposed to something that is a visible eyesore. So you want to be able to match existing colors and textures whenever possible. And it's very important to be able to look at old surfaces and to be able to create a seamless transition from one to the other so that the eye is flown across the surface of the architecture in such a way that it's in harmony with the eye. And at the same time, too, you want to make sure that if there is any requirement for structural bracing or other things, that they are in effect also masked from view. The next one is blending, and that's really where you're altering the appearance to become part of the background. So as an example, when you look at the ones that you see, the pictures that you see at the bottom here, you can see how effectively, as an example of the picture in the middle, where you can see the cell equipment, which if you kind of look halfway up the picture, you can see on the left and the right. It's blended perfectly in with the existing structure. And if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see where the equipment obviously is going, on the top structure of the building on the roof, but you can see how perfectly it's blended in with the original architectural design. So ideally, the characteristics, once again, that you want to take into consideration, you need to kind of even look at the terrain patterns in the vicinity to try to figure out how to be able to blend in with existing structures. And at the same time, too, the object's size and its shape and texture and color are also very, very important, so that, once again, you're creating something that looks like it's always been there as opposed to something that was just put up at the last minute. And now we're going to talk about disguising, and this one is very different and actually has evolved quite a bit over the past several years. And this is really where you're trying to take a cellular installation and make it look like something that it's not. So as an example, on the left-hand side, you can see a bell tower has been constructed to hide the internal cellular equipment. But it's more than just structures like bell towers. It can also be, as an example, as you see in the center, where signage is actually effectively built right into the existing landscape so that it's hard to imagine that there's cellular equipment there at all. At the same time, too, on the right-hand side, you can see where you've got the use of flagpoles as a means to be able to disguise the cellular equipment in the tower from not necessarily looking like something that's a piece of technical equipment, but really something more that looks like it was intentionally put there for aesthetic reasons. And so concealment really, if you look at these best practices, hiding, blending, and disguising, that they can be integrated in a whole host of different installations that you might be able to see in your community or in other communities that work very, very effectively. So as an example, rooftop designs, steeples, flagpoles, faux pine trees and palm trees. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. But even out in the West, they've got fake cactuses, silos, light poles, a whole host of different potential applications where these practices, best practices of concealment can be seen. So when we talk about poles and trees, these are really just some of the things that you might want to take into consideration if in fact this is something that looks like it would make sense for you in your community. First of all, it's important to make sure that that the structure itself looks like it fits, and it looks like it's something that's either natural or something that was thought to be there initially, as opposed to something that's just an afterthought. So as an example, you want to make sure that the fake tree, as an example, it replicates the shape and structure of live trees that are in the area. So, it's ideal if you can, is to, instead of having just a standalone tree tower, that you're able to integrate the tree tower with other trees around it that perhaps maybe might not be as tall, but might be similar enough in height in order to be able to make the faux tree look like it belongs there. In addition to that as well, it's important to remember the details. So as an example, coax cables should be routed directly from the ground up through the pole so that you don't see any type of wiring or any superfluous materials that would create a situation where the viewer would be able to tell that the application was different than what it visually looks like. So poles, once again, also too, and trees should not exceed the tower's permit height. We're finding in many instances that after the fact that there potentially can be issues where, as an example, the limbs of a faux tree might exceed the height parameters of the initial tower. And this can potentially create problems down the road. So it's important to make sure that you're including all of the potential aspects of the installation above and beyond just the structure of the trunk of the fig tree itself. Also, too, antennas should be totally concealed, perhaps using antenna socks, things like that. And as an example, with flagpoles, you need to make sure that the flagpoles are being installed with compliance to country codes for the display of flags, and it can be quite significant depending on the location where the flag is being displayed. So the other thing too that you also want to consider is that because of the fact that the cellular demand in the network is forever growing, really, at this point, that you want to be able to consider future co-location, because while today you may have a requirement for one carrier, in the future you may want to be able to have an installation that's capable of being able to satisfy the requirements of many different carriers. Towers, as it states on the slide, they come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. There's no question about that. But the thing is that as we were talking about co-location, that there's no question that towers really lend themselves the best to co-location. So as an example, if you look at the example, the second picture in from the left, you can see that that's a substantial amount of space, especially for additional carrier equipment to be included. And because of the inherent structure of these towers, this additional added space makes it very, very easy for co-location. But at the same time, too, the thing about towers is that it's very important that you take into consideration the aesthetics of the development of the design, because of all of the best practices that we're discussing today, towers are probably the most important as far as making sure that they fit in with the surrounding architecture, or else they'll look out of place. So it's important that you get the community involved in the process early on, and that you have a very good understanding of what the ultimate application is going to look like down the road when it's completed. Also, too, one of the things especially about towers that's important to take into consideration is that you get a good understanding of what the requirements are going to be for fabrication. The less that you have to do on the site, the better your chances are of ultimately ending up with a finished product that looks like what you were looking for. So it's important to be able to stay involved from planning through completion whenever you're talking about tower applications. In addition to that as well, I'd like to talk just a little bit about utility building and transmission equipment. This is these are some of the things that oftentimes people forget to think about when they're looking at potential concealments. They're thinking a lot about the tower itself, but it's important to remember that there's also ancillary equipment that goes along with it. So it's important to make sure that you're integrating, if necessary, all of the things that are associated with utility buildings and transmission equipment that perhaps might not necessarily be attached to the tower, but might be close to it. So as an example, you've got base station equipment that could potentially needed to be blended into the environment. And also, too, what we're finding is that even beyond cellular equipment, that in many instances that there's also the potential to use this same type of concealment technology for perhaps some other applications that you might have out there as far as air conditioners or other potential rooftop mounted equipment. Now, one of the things to take into consideration when you're looking at concealment for utility buildings and transmission equipment itself, because it's not part of the antenna, it opens up even more options for you to use different kinds of materials and techniques because of the fact that you don't have to worry about the RF or radio frequency transparency of the equipment that would be, as an example, wrapped around, say, a cellular antenna. So that's a good thing. It provides you even with more choices and more options to blend in with your surroundings. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about distributed antenna systems, or DAS. And if you haven't heard about DAS up until now, you're going to be hearing a lot about it. In essence, really, it's a new technique for carriers to be able to build out capacity and connectivity capability in their network without having to build large towers. So in essence, what they're able to do is that they're able to take smaller towers, and when I say smaller towers, I mean much smaller. Like as an example, if you look at the picture off to the lower upper left, you can see that is a light pole where you've got two antennas basically connected. So the idea is that you take these smaller towers and you connect them together in a ring configuration, so that in essence you can get the same coverage, or perhaps maybe in some instances better coverage, in a given geographic footprint without necessarily having to build the large monolithic cell towers that we are familiar with. Also, in a distributed antenna system environment, one of the things that's great is that normally the equipment is directed, or the antenna transmission itself is directed to a single hub location where multiple carriers can have the same their equipment located in one central place. Now, one of the things is that there are many different types of distributed antenna system, or DAS, applications. The one that you probably would want to consider, at least when you're looking at the potential of this in your community, is a neutral host environment. And the beauty of a neutral host environment is, as I was mentioning before, that it gives you the ability to be able to have multiple carriers on the same installation. So one of the beauties of DAS is that it can take advantage of existing public right-of-way infrastructure. So as you can see from both of these applications, you can see that because you're dealing with smaller equipment at a much lower level, much closer to the cellular users that are on the ground, that you can easily conceal antennas and equipment in structures that look like they're just a normal part of your community. And once again, you can also host multiple operator equipment within these same applications. So it has a tremendous amount of flexibility. Now let's talk about rooftop concealments. Many of you are in environments where historic preservation is an important part of your community or your campus environment. And rooftop concealments do an excellent job of allowing you to be able to integrate the equipment and the technology into the landscape without you necessarily having to deal with large standalone towers. Some of the things, though, that you want to take into consideration, though, is, as an example, especially with rooftop additions, that you're really looking at a 360-degree line of view in many instances. And not only from below, but as an example, in places like Manhattan where you have large skyscrapers, you also have to deal with visibility from above. So you need to make sure that all sides of the application from view are being concealed. So as an example, if you look over on the right-hand side, you can see a picture here where it says poor design. Well, that's pretty clear that they did a good job of masking the rooftop equipment from view from the top of the building. But as you can see from the back, it's pretty clear that there was definitely not a whole lot of emphasis put on looking towards that 360-degree view of concealment. And when you're integrating these technologies, you can include columns, pilasters, corbels, any type of ornamentation that you can imagine. The materials that are available these days make it possible for fabrications to be made to integrate in virtually any type of situation. So the idea is that what you want to do is that you want to, as I mentioned earlier, integrate with the existing flow and architectural design of the building, as opposed to doing something that's going to deter from it. Some of the things to take into consideration with rooftop applications is ideally you want to try to minimize the height as much as possible. So you don't really want to go any higher than is absolutely positively necessary. By making the tower higher, what you're really doing is just creating a situation where it's more difficult to conceal. Once again, you want to integrate the structure architecturally into the environment and harmonize with the property where the concealment application is proposed. So as an example, if you look at the center picture, you can see how there clearly is a tower, but yet because of the color and because of the design, it looks like it was meant to be part of the structure of the tower. So with that being said, let's move on to talk about some of the things that you want to take into consideration when you're considering a concealment project. And so this slide really talks about the anatomy of a successful concealment project, or the things that take place from its inception all the way through to the completion of the project. And it's very important that you have a grasp of what those things are, because as they go on, they have a huge impact on what the finished product will be. So the first step really is the site assessment. And this is where really someone hands-on is going to be going out and looking at the site itself, taking into consideration the location, the elevation, what the possible limitations might be, what the possibilities could be, what the surrounding community looks like, to get a better feel for exactly, what is the general circumstance that we're starting with. Then the next is the design process, and this is really where some of the aesthetics come into play. So as an example before, when I was talking about towers and the importance of how making the tower fit in with the overall community and the overall neighborhood that it's in, it's important that you be involved right up front with the aesthetic development during the design process. And this is where mock-ups and renderings and things like that are made, so that you can truly get a feel for what the finished product is going to look like. And at the same time, too, it gives you the opportunity to be able to bring in the feedback and comments from people that are in the community, and you're able to show them something that they can basically get a good feel for. The next is really the engineering plan, and this is really how it's all going to work, and that's really a very, very important part of all of this, because if the engineering piece falls flat, then unfortunately for everyone involved, including the carrier, that the application just isn't going to operate as planned. So it's very important that the engineering piece of this is very, very well thought through and designed. Then there's the material selection, and this is really where there's a best-of-breed materials that are available in the concealment arena today. It's continuing to grow over time. As these materials come to the forefront and as they're being introduced, it's creating more and more potential opportunities. So it's really important to really understand what the materials are going to look like in the finished product, to be able to really touch them and to be able to see what they're going to look like, and perhaps maybe even view other applications that have been put in other locations, so that you can get a feel for how the materials are going to hold up, not only initially when they're put in, but also over time, how they age. Fabrication, this is a real key part to the overall concealment project as well, and this is really where the raw materials are taken from their current state and they're configured and fabricated into a finished product. Ideally, you want to have as much of this fabrication done as possible done at the factory site as opposed to having it done on the premise, because what ends up happening is that you've got time considerations that are involved in the implementation that potentially could slip. You have potential problems that could arise, deviations from the initial design, you name it. So the idea really is to try to do as much of the fabrication as possible in advance of the installation. Another key element is packing and shipping. Many of the materials that go into a cellular concealment project could be shipped over hundreds or perhaps thousands of miles in order to be able to ensure that they show up on site in the condition and quality that they were originally in when they left the factory. It all comes down to packing and shipping, and that's a real important part of this, to make sure that the vendors that you're working with have an excellent track record in being able to effectively perform that function. And then finally, the site installation. The more that can be done in advance, the easier the site installation is. And once again, the site installation is probably the most critical part of the whole overall process, because that's where the magic takes place. That's where ultimately all of the hard work and effort that went into the development of the concealment project kind of takes place and breathes life into the project. So that will kind of give you an idea of the kinds of things that you really need to take into consideration as you're looking at and approaching potential concealment opportunities in your community. But before we finish, I'd like to talk a little bit about stealth. Stealth concealment. We've been a leader in the industry for over 20 years and have really pioneered the first concealment applications and installations right when the beginning of the industry had started, and we've been a part of it ever since. And we continue to keep evolving and leading the state of the art in what the potential opportunities could be for concealment technology. And so we're going to continue to keep doing that, and we'd like to think that we can act in a positive way in bringing concealment technology to your community. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. So this is the time, I guess, where if you have already muted your mic, please open, and I'd love to take your questions and comments. Any questions? Okay, well, with that, I would once again like to thank you for your time. And I'd also like to point you to the contact information at the bottom of this slide, and you could please make reference of this telephone number. And if you do happen to have any questions in the future, or if you'd like to hear more about concealment and what the potentials of concealment can be, and want to hear more potentially about stealth concealment as well, please either contact Cindy Wishart or Haley Power at the numbers that are listed below. So thank you again for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thanks.